Well, just for the sake of the ambassador and his wife, how many of you speak Latvian, just out of curiosity? How many of you have lived in Latvia? And then how many of you have been to the Baltics, any of the Baltic countries? How many of you have been to Europe? So I think that gives you a little quick demographic insight. So I guess about 20% of your talk could be in Latvian. So, well, His Excellency Andris Razans is the Latvian ambassador to the United States and Mexico. He previously served as the Undersecretary of State in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as well as Ambassador at Large of the Planning Group of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Ambassador of Latvia to Morocco and to Denmark. During a long diplomatic career, his other positions have included diplomatic advisor to Latvia's president and prime minister, the deputy head of mission at the Latvian embassy to Sweden, and the head of the EU policy division for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's fluent in English, Russian, and Swedish. He received his MA in history from the Latvian State University and has studied and done research in other universities. As I mentioned today, the title for his presentation, Europe, Opportunities and Challenges, the EU Presidency of Latvia. Please join me in welcoming to BYU Ambassador Razans.
Good afternoon, or labdien. I understand that quite many of you understand what that means in Latvian. But I'm utterly delighted to be among you today and to deliver my thoughts on developments in our very beautiful and interesting part of Europe, northern part of Europe, where Latvia is a part of. And the topic of my today's address is about European Union, Latvian EU presidency, what that means, what that doesn't mean, and how do we feel in current situation in Europe, and what might be the next steps perhaps taken both in Europe and maybe in transatlantic family of countries. I think perhaps for journalists that are writing about developments in Europe, perhaps the most interesting topic these days is what's happening in Greece and what's happening in not so distant region of Latvia, eastern part of Ukraine, what's happening in Moscow. But for Latvia to hold the EU presidency 25 years after we have regained our independence, it's really a tremendous strategic achievement. In '91, when we managed to get through the double Berlin Wall, and not only physical, that was an easy one in Berlin. Of course, for Americans, it's very historically emotional piece, and of course I understand that, and for many Europeans as well. But we have been hidden behind the double Berlin Wall, and the second part was more difficult to penetrate. That was Soviet Union's border, making the dividing us not only from the remaining part of our heritage as Europeans, but as well separating us from, well, the very good friends and neighbors like Poland. That was part of Warsaw Pact, but to be part of Soviet Union, that was something else. The Poles never lost their geographical space or territory. Well, they have lost something, but Poland was a country still during the Cold War time. Of course, different country in many ways from what we know Poland was before the Second World War. But Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, they have been simply wiped out from European map. We know the reasons. And we have been forgotten, basically. For 50 years, Latvians have been often called, just because of political convenience or correctness or simply ignorance as Russians during 50 years of our history. And that suddenly changed in 91, and there we were, countries that emerged from Soviet Union, not only three Baltic nations that had experienced 20 years of democratic, peaceful development, together with Poland and Finland. I mention Finland because, well, in 1918, there were, as I see, countries in our region, not only three Baltic nations, but as well Finland, that emerged as an independent state. And in many ways, Finland has the very same historic background and characteristics that she definitely shares with Baltic nations in many ways. And since that time, since 1918, Latvia was, of course, a country that was developing fast. We have been engaging in many ways with our European partners. We established our diplomatic relations with the United States a little bit more than 90 years ago. We adopted our constitution in 1922. That's the sixth oldest constitution in the world. That's still intact. So in 91, when we restored our independence, we as well restored the legality of our constitution. We didn't switch to a new constitution. We just added a piece that was missing in our constitution on human rights. But the very same constitution what we had what our ancestors had in 20s and 30s, that was still intact. And with the United States, we share a very important relationship. And maybe you have seen that, you have noticed that being in the Baltics, United States has never recognized the occupation of three Baltic states. Politically, it was extremely important step and decision that helped us to restore our independence immensely. We had something legally really to claim our independence. That helped us. We had as well our embassy in Washington, D.C. Live and functioning during Cold War time. Although there was no state of Latvia de facto, but de jure there was a state, an embassy was there, and diplomats were working hard to prepare for a time when Latvia would regain independence. And besides that, Latvian state managed to shift out of the state just before war state gold reserves, and these gold reserves have been kept in the banks in New York City. And Latvian embassy was in charge of these gold reserves, so they have been paying bills. They have been giving loans to Lithuanian colleagues to pay the bills of Lithuanian embassy. And at some point, Lithuania paid back in 2002 a debt, a very nice and positive debt. So that's in brief. That I think constitutes a little bit of background of our relations with the United States, and I think that creates very positive and good background for whatever we might be doing. The history of Latvia goes really down to very old times. Basically, when we restored our independence, it was not only about the reforms, not only about our economic development, not only about the policies, but it was first of all about our return back to the European cradle, returning back to our values and traditions. And when these days we see the relationship unfolding between European Union and countries in Europe that still are claiming their rightful right to become part of European Union, but for one or another reason, countries like Ukraine or Moldova or Georgia, they haven't managed to achieve what the Baltic states had achieved the last 20 years. I think it's extremely important to really point out that values, European heritage, respect of human rights really matters when it's about the transition from one political system, what we share together with other our brothers and countries like Ukraine and Moldova during the Soviet occupation, because the value system helps really to focus better. It helps to do what's right. It helps better to get through difficulties of transition, and it's very important to remember that right now, when we see the situation in Europe really developing in a way that perhaps nobody was able to predict just 1 year or 2 years ago. And our presidency, of course, is political manifestation of what we have achieved, but as well it shows very much that Latvia finally has returned back to the very place that we considered us belonging. Europe, in this time European Union, that history that well, we have been studying and living basically in culture that goes really deep down to the very early years of a country that was sometimes known as Livonia, part of Latvia and Estonia, country established by Teutonic Knights, and country that was there for 300 years, a country that had many connections with the rest of Europe in good days and bad days, country that changed a little bit the character when the nation states emerged, like Poland or Sweden. So we have shared many common things together with our Polish, with Poland during the Polish time of greatness. The 100 years together with the Swedish kingdom as a part of Swedish kingdom. That was a time that Latvia, Estonia, and Finland was part of Sweden for 100 years. Then period of Tsarist Russia for approximately 150 years. So I'm still saying that to make a little bit background. Sometimes what I have noticed, it's a little bit difficult really to grasp the importance of this, what we think is important, Latvia as a EU member, not only member, but as well presidency, because simply it shows that we have done something very important. And when we try to look on our EU presidency, of course each and every presidency of European Union has its own priorities. Presidency lasts only for 6 months, half of the year, but each and every presidency has its own priorities. Priorities are not something that we just figure out and just do the thing. It depends very much on what kind of agreement we have had with previous presidency, for instance, Italians. That was Italy that hold the presidency before Latvia, and after us will follow Luxembourg, to put together the priorities, 3 countries. The presidency, incoming presidency, and previous presidency should have an agreement, agreement on the priorities in all areas. And we did that. Then, of course, there are priorities that simply we have taken over from the period of times, maybe of 10 years history, things that actually are developing, but maybe not properly done until this time. That's still a matter of the presidency. Out of all aspects of European work or of EU work, approximately 90-95% of the tasks still are tasks for the presidency to try to negotiate a deal, an agreement among 28 very different countries with very different interests around the table, how to navigate to have an agreement at the level of heads of the states and governments. That as well is a presidency's task. And then we should add as well, at the end we need to have an agreement with European Parliament. That's as well presidency's task. The only area where presidency is not running a show, it's foreign and security policy. All the other things are really matter of the presidency, and that's what Latvia has been doing since beginning of this year. I will a little bit later speak on our priorities, but when the priorities, that's very natural that each and every presidency put together priorities, but the very development of Europe shows that irrespectively how well you plan, you always get something that you haven't been prepared. There are always some issues that come in as challenges that suddenly you have something on your hands that you should act very fast. And if I would be asked just 1.5 years before what would be the challenges of Latvian EU presidency during these 6 months, definitely I wouldn't be able to tell that crisis in Ukraine would become a challenge for our EU presidency. So we haven't been preparing for that, definitely, because we are not aware. We felt that something wrong was coming, but we are not prepared for that. The crisis produced by ISIL in the Middle East, that wasn't something that we have been preparing, but EU definitely has to act, has to take very important steps together with the United States to prevent this cancer from expanding in the region. And of course, it's European neighborhood. It's Middle East. Europeans should take very seriously developments there. That's the second area we were not preparing. So these two issues came in as a challenges, and then what we can do right now. Well, we have. Maybe I can a little bit tell you on priorities side. I know that you are engaging in kind of a program with other universities here representing Latvia as a presidency, and I believe it's very important to speak a little bit on our priorities of European presidency, how we see it, and then I will speak on the challenge side, because I think that both two things really come together, priorities and challenges. And priorities, we have divided our priorities in 3 different groups. You have seen that Europe is really underperforming economically already for quite a long time. And the priority that we consider very important is how to organize the work of European Union, that EU gets back economically on its feet. You are doing much better in the United States than Europe does today. You are growing faster. One of the priorities that will come, you have perhaps noticed that European Commission had come forward with the European Strategic Investment Fund idea. It's about money in size of an amount of 315 billion euros that is supposed to be invested in different projects in all European EU countries, irrespectively whether these countries joined EU recently or those are all the European Union countries. But those should be invested in different projects in areas that would make Europe more economically strong and growing again. But one thing is really to find money. Another thing is really to invest in a proper way that it gives back the result. Latvia has to, as a presidency, has to organize the work of European Union until June, that EU as well adopt the new fund, how it will, the mechanism, how this money will be invested, in which areas, what are the areas where Europe really needs investment. And that's something for the presidency to navigate, to come up with strategy, with vision, and then at the end have everybody agreed around the table by June this year. The second area, what we consider important, it is area of digital market. Well, in the United States, it's easy for you. You simply, if you wish to buy something, you go on internet, online, you find a product you would wish to buy, you simply order product, you pay by your credit card, and then you receive a product. In Europe, it's not easy like that. Still, we have many obstacles in between nation states, and one of the areas where Latvia will be pushing hard is to come up with a strategy to find out where are these obstacles that prevents economy functioning properly, and then with the concrete proposals how to remove these barriers to make digital trade really a good thing. In Europe, it's a huge market. It would be very important for Europeans as well to benefit properly. And that's the first area. Energy. Europe these days is very much dependent on energy imports. And me coming from a country that is, well, 100% still dependent on natural gas imports from Russia, well, we think it's very important to find a way how to make Europe more secure by means of proper legislation that should be introduced, by building up new infrastructure that connects different regions of Europe and makes it more market-driven. So we came up with the proposals in the area of profound European energy union. That's an area that we think Europe can really do better if we work better together. One area of investment from the strategic fund, what I mentioned, I think should be in area of energy, new infrastructure, new pipes, new LNG terminals, things that are relevant really to make sure that Europe is not only looking around for energy resources, but is able to receive energy coming, and as well that would be a great opening for all those nations that do possess energy resources, including United States of America. That energy union is coming, and Latvian EU presidency really is working hard to advance this agenda, because we are among the most vulnerable nations among EU members when it comes to energy security. We are still very, very dependent on the mindsets of how things are run in Kremlin, and as well the prices what we are paying for gas, of course, are not very much determined by the price what we can get on the market, but there are other conditions that make an impact on the price we are paying for gas. So we would like to see that Europe really matures and gets stronger when it comes to energy security and true energy market. The second area of our interest is what we call more engaged Europe. That means basically three very concrete things. First of all, more engaged Europe means more engagement with our immediate neighbors. Either it's in the east of Europe. In the east we mean Ukraine, Moldova, Caucasus, Belarus, and as well Central Asian nations. And as well, more engaged Europe means more active, clear EU policy in Middle East, especially in time when we are faced with unfolding deterioration of the security because of ISIS presence and activity in the Middle East. These are the areas where what Latvia considers as well very highly among the priorities, not only of Latvia, but as well of European Union. In Riga in May, we are planning EU summit that will be devoted to the group of countries, what we call in Europe Eastern Partners. 6 countries on the east of Europe: Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, and 3 Caucasus countries: Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. And this summit will be about the strategy how to bring these countries more closer to Europe. There are 6 very different countries. Maybe they have different agendas. Some of them would love to join European Union and become part of EU, like Ukraine, like Moldova, like Georgia, and they are doing their utmost really to achieve that. But there are countries that are not really claiming this goal, like Belarus, that would prefer to have something else, like Azerbaijan, that is looking for kind of more strategic relations with the EU without membership, and Armenia that still has to decide what's really important for Armenian relations with the EU. So our idea is that at this summit in Riga in May, European Union reconfirms the strategic importance of relations with these countries, that we would be more than happy to see that if we Europeans are able to have an agreement among ourselves and then with 6 nations on more free movement of people between some of these countries and European Union, that would facilitate exchange of as well of students, and that is something what we have benefited as a nation in 90s from open borders, when we had a chance to travel in Europe without any hindrance. And that is something what we are planning for our immediate neighbors. And the third area, when it comes to more engaged Europe, it's something what is extremely important in relations between Europe and United States. The transatlantic relations are known mostly for the very presence of NATO, North Atlantic Alliance, and as the main central element in our relations, and of course it's going to remain like that. But when we look on other parts of our relationship, we think that one area where we need to improve it's in trade, and Latvia as a EU presidency will be facilitating a chance to sign the transatlantic trade and investment partnership agreement, TTIP, hopefully by the end of next year. That would really would be of strategic importance for both sides of the Atlantic. It doesn't mean that this agreement is not about minimizing the standards of quality of goods or trade, but it's about the setting of standards, how the trade should be run in the years to come. If these 2 very big trading partners in the world have an agreement, this agreement will, in many ways, will make an impact for next at least 50 years in the world, how trade will be run, and that will be done by the nations that really have very high standards on trade and a good quality, and perhaps we do it on our own before somebody else does it instead of us. And strategically, it's extremely important to add this agreement to NATO alliance. I think that would be really a very proper response in our relations of the current century. So that's about our priorities. It's very simple. There are all the other things that are coming from previous presidencies, but these are these are the issues that we consider Latvian priorities, and we are focusing at in very detail. And then it's not enough just to set priorities, but when we have priorities, we have as well challenges. And I began by saying that in '91 we started from the very same point of departure with countries that emerged from Soviet Union, like Ukraine and Moldova and others. And when we look on developments today, you have quite a different picture. You have Latvia on one side as a presidency of European Union of 28 nations, political union, economic union, cultural union. And then you have countries like Ukraine that's currently under the Russian invasion, that's fighting for basically for its own survival and independence and sovereignty. And then you ask yourself why things actually, in the Baltic case, went in a different direction, and in case of Ukraine or maybe others with whom we shared these 50 years of Soviet occupation went a little bit other direction. And I think answer is very simple. It was the process of transformation of reforms, very painful reforms that Baltic states engaged. You remember this very vivid, maybe you haven't seen it, you're too young. I was about in my 20s, I was 20 or 19 that time, when we held the Baltic human chain in the Baltics in 89, just a month before Berlin Wall fell down. The people of Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, they formed the human chain stretching from the capital of Lithuania, Vilnius, to Latvian capital Riga, and then to Estonian capital Tallinn. It's a distance from San Francisco to LA, and we stood hand in hand for approximately 5 minutes. This chain was there, and we called it Baltic Way. And when I have been asked what's necessary for countries like Ukraine or Moldova or Georgia or Armenia to integrate with European Union to do things better, I say, well, there's only one way they should go. It's a Baltic way. It doesn't mean that they should stand in hand from Kiev to Chisinau, then further to Tbilisi, but it means that they should go through a very painful and difficult period of reforms. In '91, when we regained independence, one of the first things what we did in Latvia, we immediately get through the reform of 100% of restitution of properties. All the people that owned something before the war, Second World War, and all the people that lost their properties, and in the Soviet Union there was no such thing as private property on house or apartment or flat or land. Everything was taken away by communists. The total restitution of the properties was immediately priority number one, and basically everybody who owned something before the war, or their children or grandchildren, irrespectively whether they have been living in Latvia or United States or Israel or Russia, if their ancestors possessed a property in Latvia and they were citizens at the time when Soviets moved into Latvia in 1940, they got back the properties. That was, I think, very important thing to do, and as well land property. Everything is private these days in Latvia. It's like here. It's not the case all around the remaining part of group of countries that emerged from the Soviet Union. The second thing what we did immediately, we engaged in very fast and important currency reform. So during Soviet days, Latvia was part of Russian Soviet ruble zone, and of course it would be a great mistake to keep Russian ruble in Latvia. So what we did, we had to cut ties with this currency in order to be able to integrate our financial system with the remaining part of the world. Because for 50 years that has been denied by occupying power. So we went through a very difficult but very successful currency reform, and in basically 3 years' time we had extremely stable and good currency in Latvia. for at least 20 years before we moved to euro. And after that, what we did, because of the state owned everything, including factories and railway and energy plants, etc. We went through a very difficult period of privatization. We have been looking out for investors, for everybody who wanted to buy something from the state and invest and do business. So that was as well, it took approximately 5-6 years to go through the process of privatization. And the third element, what we have been doing properly was we imposed as well democratic institutions, and based on very values of what you are sharing here in Utah, we have been doing the same thing. Of course, we have been coming from a bit behind these 50 years of occupation method with different system. But human rights, democratic system, that was something what we took very seriously. We understood it as a package deal. If we wanted to integrate somewhere in Europe, we had to be democratic. It's not only to go out with outstretched hand and ask for support. We had to be democratic, and we did that. And as a reward came our ability to apply for EU membership at the end of 90s, and as well to be considered as NATO ally. In 2004, Latvia joined both organizations, European Union and NATO. And that's not because we have been more lucky or better educated or something like that. No, we just went through a difficult period of reforms. And that's something what Ukraine has to do right now. Not wait only until the last Russian soldier has left Ukraine, or when they have control over their borders. They need to transform, they need to reform their own country immediately to get rid of corruption, to introduce really rule of law in their country, things that I can call Baltic way, and that's what Ukraine should do. Last year we introduced euro, we moved to Eurozone. If you have questions about that, why we did that, I would be more than happy to answer. But that was a background before our presidency, all the things that led to our presidency. And then when this very formal event took place and we took over the presidency from Italians, of course we got as well some problems like crisis in Ukraine and like ISIS, two strategically very important elements for Europe on the Europe's east and in the south. Both in many ways are contributing to less stable, less secure Europe, and somehow Latvia has to deal with both crises at the EU level. So that's shortly about our EU presidency, how we feel, what we see, and what are the priorities and challenges. And I would be more than happy really to answer a couple of your questions before you leave. Thank you so much.
So we have just a few minutes for questions. The ground rules are we just invite you to come and form a short line here by the mic. Tell us your name and what you're studying, and we'll use the remaining time, as the ambassador has indicated, for your questions.
You can ask in Latvian as well.
Connor Mills, I study supply chain management. So I'm just curious, does the European Union have any plans right now to deal with what ISIS is doing right now? Do they have a strategy or something?
Yes, that's something what European Union is dealing with currently. It had been, well, it's first of all, I think it's really very unfortunate to see that quite a many Europeans of maybe background in some Arab countries, that they are really joining the ISIS and trying to fight together with them. But that's the, I think, result of, in many cases, of very unsuccessful integration within European societies of some of immigrant groups. That simply shows that perhaps if you have the third generation immigrants that are really not able to, that are ready to leave democratic systems and do something else, it doesn't show that integration systems had worked properly in Europe. But what we are doing, yes, we are putting together legislation, what's necessary to be placed to prevent people from engaging in these terrorist activities. For instance, in Latvia, we just recently adopted a law that makes it criminal to engage in these military activities outside Latvia, and it's punishable. There's a criminal penalty for that, and as well, if you finance activities like that as well, it's a criminal offense. You are punished for that. But on the EU level, of course, there are many things that you can do. For instance, sharing more information on travel lists. That's something what's coming, or sharing better information among themselves, improving information sharing between Europol and other relevant institutions, and of course between EU and United States. Well, that's what Europe is doing.
Okay, thanks.
I'm Christopher Wagstaff, and I'm studying chemical engineering. So you said that the euro, or accepting the euro, is a background for the Latvian presidency. Lithuania had the presidency before they adopted the euro. So what does adopting the euro allow Latvia to do that that Lithuania was maybe able to do?
Well, Europe, it's not a frozen project. Europe is constantly evolving, and Europe from time to time gets into trouble, but then somehow we manage to really to have an agreement, and we are doing more or less fine. And what I meant was that if you are part of Eurozone, and there are 19 countries now with Lithuania that joined this year, if you have and this group actually is a group of countries that has a little bit different organization, how we discuss on equal terms issues related to economic and financial growth in Europe and stability, financial stability. For instance, if you're part of Eurozone, your governor of your national bank sits as one among the today now 19 equals around the table in Frankfurt at the European Central Bank, and they are discussing the policies, they're adopting decisions based on equality. They have each and every person has one voice or one vote when decisions are taken. For instance, Latvia has the same weight in this decision as, let's say, Germany, with a bit different economic and financial muscle. But when you're around this table, everybody is equal, and that actually increases your political clout to do some important stuff.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Gentry Carter. I'm a public relations major. So European growth, digital development, and engagement are all kind of like very different priorities, and obviously like the goal is to set a foundation in each one. But what are some concrete examples of what Latvia wants to do in the terms of a 6-month presidency?
Well, first, very concrete things when it comes to economic growth. This fund, what I mentioned, for strategic investment of European Union, we need to have a mechanism created by June that's able to invest properly the financial means allocated by European Commission in strategically important European economic areas. And this fund, the creation, either it's there by June or not, very much depending on how presidency will be managing the discussion on this fund. So that's a very concrete thing. The second, when it comes to engagement with more engaged Europe, it's about, first of all, there are two regions what Latvia considers of strategic importance, where we have special relationship as a member state, perhaps where the others don't have so much interest. First, our immediate neighborhood, meaning Belarus, Ukraine, and as well Georgia, Moldova, Azerbaijan, Armenia, 6 countries that are called Eastern partners. We would love to see that, for instance, there is more, provided that Belarus does what Belarus have to do, freeing political prisoners and engaging more actively with Europe. If they do that, we would be the country that would support more liberal travel regime between Belarus and European Union. We think it's important that people that are able to travel more or less freely or more free, that's a very concrete thing. And if it's about transatlantic relations, and it's TTIP, it's the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Agreement, it's very concrete. If we fail, if we are lousy and slow and are not able to get everybody around the table to agree, most likely it will be difficult to have any kind of deal between the United States and EU by the end of 2016. It's very concrete.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I'm Brett Jory. I'm studying political science and Russian. And Latvia has some neighbors that maybe aren't so favorable of the European Union. What would you say to those who perceive the EU as maybe a precursor to NATO expansion?
I just would love to say that they are living in perhaps in the 18th or 19th century, that they are completely outdated in their thinking, that they simply do not understand the world, but they are trying to impose their way of how they perceive the world on the others. They shouldn't be afraid of EU. They better reform their own countries to get rid of corruption, to impose, to have more democratic system, to open for the world, and really not threaten the neighbors. I think that's my advice to them. That's the only thing.
Okay.
And make sure that their citizens are living at least as good as people in Latvia or Lithuania or Spain.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Our last question.
Hi, Warren Fraser, International Relations. I was wondering, with Latvia has something like, I think, 25% of the population identifies as Russian. So with Russia being kind of the big alternative to the EU in the region, how does the Latvian presidency of the EU does that create some tensions within Latvia because of that, or is it just considered just a foreign affairs thing?
Well, thank you so much. It's a good question. First, I can't say that in our region or in Central Europe that Russia is alternative. Russia definitely is not an alternative. If they do things better to organize the way how Russia is run, and Russia becomes democratic and more appealing, then probably. But out of these, you mentioned 26% of ethnic Russians living in Latvia. I think that's a great misperception in the West and in media that tries to portray that these 26% ethnic Russians that are living in Latvia, that they constitute kind of single, very consolidated group of population. But it's not true, and it's not. Russians didn't fall down from a moon to Latvia. They have been living basically in Latvia through centuries, and among these 26%, there are Russians whose ancestors have been living in Latvia through centuries, and they are absolutely brilliantly integrated within the society. And the only thing is that they prefer to speak at home Russian. But they are as democratic and European as anybody else in Latvia. So in a way, it's they will not run to support funny ideas coming from somewhere. Well, there are Russians that came to Latvia during 60s and 70s last century because of the industrialization period of Latvia. They came as a labor force, basically. And there are different generations, young Russians that have studied and still study, not only in Latvia, but they study in Europe, they study in the United States. They speak perfect Russian, Latvian, English, French, German. So in a way, they have nothing to do with these ideas, what we hear coming from time to time from Russia these days. But of course, there are Russians that mostly represent elderly generation that have never given up idea of having a big country with nuclear weapons, feared not because and just feared because of these nuclear weapons. And these people will never give up. I think it's impossible to convince them that that's more funny to live in a small and democratic country. And so there are different groups. So I'm not so much really concerned that suddenly we might have situation that might get out of control, or I think it's exaggerated, and these 20 years of reforms really matter. In case of Ukraine, I think they have acknowledged that only now, that they have missed out the golden opportunity. Hopefully they will be able to do that, but I think that would be my answer.
Thank you for your questions, and please join me in thanking the ambassador.
Thank you so much.